Hofstede's Uncertainty Avoidance Index. Described on Hofstede's website as the degree to which the members of a society feel comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity, it's a metric that determines to what extent a culture is willing to leave things up to the unpredictable. To put it another way, it's basically a metric that investigates to what extent a culture allows things to occur with or without some long-term strategy in mind. Although online you'll find countless academic articles discussing the various aspects of how this metric affects the world, in this video I'll try to take some of the available data online to investigate some of the measured, real-world outcomes and circumstances that arise from this particular metric, specifically with a focus on the economical effects of this famous cultural dimension. Now at first, you might look at something like the Uncertainty Index and wonder what it actually could affect in terms of the economic outcomes of a country. You might find yourself asking questions like, does it result in more innovation? Does it make for more long-lasting businesses? Does it make the stock prices of a business look like it belongs in the cryptocurrency market? All of these are good questions, but a good first thing to look at to get a general idea of how this metric affects economic outcomes is the GDP per capita. Now, if you've already taken an economics class at Hotchkiss, chances are that you have heard of this exact metric. For those of you that don't know, though, it's basically a fancy way of saying the amount of money produced per person living in a given area. Not exactly, but yeah. In more economically strong countries like the US, we have a GDP of about $70,000. Other countries that lack important economic infrastructure, like Papua New Guinea, for example, have a GDP of about $2,600. Regardless of the context in which you might have heard of this metric, GDP per capita is amongst one of the most accurate indicators when it comes to measuring the economic success of a country. Now with those boring definitions out of the way, let's begin our even more fun and interesting comparison of GDP per capitas of some of the countries with the higher uncertainty avoidance indices to those with the lower uncertainty avoidance indices. First up is Germany, Portugal, and Japan, all that have about 51,000, 25,000, and 39,000 GDP per capitas, respectively. Next up, we have Ireland, Denmark, and Jamaica, all of which have about 100,000, 68,000, and $5,000 as their GDP per capitas. To start things off, I noticed right away, as some of you guys probably did, that the countries with the lower uncertainty avoidance indices tended to have higher GDPs per capita.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
After like a horrendous amount of research, I realized that this discrepancy was a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. Even though my method of selecting countries wasn't perfect due to like limited data and other things like that, what I did happen to notice was that there was a significant, almost double difference in the GDPs between countries that had low uncertainty avoidance and those that had high uncertainty avoidance. Even despite the fact that the data wasn't perfectly sampled, I realized that it was trying to tell me something. So I basically considered to ask myself why all of this could be the case, and I started thinking about specifically why it was that the countries that had a lower uncertainty avoidance tended to make more than those that had a higher uncertainty avoidance. One of the first things that ended up coming to mind actually just came from remembering a topic that we had already discussed in class, which was a very convenient thing to happen conveniently to me. Basically, the idea just comes back to this topic where there's just two people that are waiting to be picked up from an airport. On one hand, you can probably imagine the psychological characteristics of an individual with a very high level of uncertainty avoidance. They want to know where to be and when, the color of the car they're being picked up with, the make of the car, the name of the person picking them up, a comprehensive idea of where they're going, what the weather's going to be like, what level of formality they'll need to use, and the list goes on and on and on. This is as opposed to somebody with a very low level of uncertainty avoidance who simply is just going to leave their terminal and just look for their name on a note card once they get out. Anyways, my main point being this. Think of those same hypothetical circumstances, right? But instead of some interpersonal context where there's like communication and details involved, think of it from like an evolutionary perspective of someone just sitting there and trying to invent something. But let's just say that you're a caveman living in the BC era and you're considering inventing the wheel. You've thought it over, you've tested a few hypotheses, but you still don't trust yourself. What if you carve out the wheel and it doesn't work? What if your experiments beforehand were wrong to test things out? What if there's something better that you could be doing with your time? This is as opposed to the caveman that simply comes up with a rough idea, tests it out the same day, maybe messes up a little bit with the design at first, but eventually, and with enough time and effort, comes up with an economically more valuable and efficient way to transport things from point A to point B. Anyway, the main point I'm making here being that valuable innovation is a lot easier and quicker when you're open to a healthy amount of risk and trial and error. At the end of the day, this is exactly what the uncertainty index is all about. Quite literally, it's a measure of the amount of apprehensions a culture is expected to have before trying out something new and unfamiliar to them. Thinking a little bit more deeply about how innovation ties into creativity starts to make this entire puzzle make a lot more sense. especially when you consider that it's innovation and technology that understandably ranks as one of the top factors in economic growth in most academic articles that you'll look into investigating the subject today. At any rate, a little more digging into the Uncertainty Avoidance Index online will help to confirm this exact hypothesis. This specific article stating that higher index cultures help to provide more systematic routes for problem solving, while lower indices allow for conditions that, as you can probably imagine, would allow for more innovation. Obviously, though, this entire argument doesn't exactly begin and end with innovation. The large discrepancies that we saw from this table from earlier can be explained by a whole host of things that the Uncertainty Avoidance Index also influences. More research into the communication aspects of things for the Uncertainty Avoidance Index, for example, suggests that it could cause incompatibilities between business employees and clients in a multicultural context. An article from Science Direct goes a lot more in depth on this exact topic of how high uncertainty avoidance can have an undesirable effect on business transactions. Clients of business representatives with a high degree of uncertainty, for instance, might expect a project to require more documentation relevant to its creation. As you can likely imagine, this kind of formal, systematic documentation can sometimes be more than what a low uncertainty management in a business can sometimes provide, causing an incompatibility. This same strictness on the behalf of higher uncertainty avoidance cultures, as you could probably imagine, could result in business relationships being terminated as a result of demands too strict to keep up with. In the end, this has the potential of leaving the high uncertainty clients with a sunk financial cost, and the low uncertainty avoidance clients with a sunk cost of production. And it isn't just the documentation of projects that could cause these kind of incompatibilities. High uncertainty clients might demand incompatible requirements for deadlines, planning, or feedback that an otherwise creative low uncertainty business would be unable to provide. As a result of behaviors such as this, the high uncertainty avoidance client is essentially left with a smaller pool of prospective businesses to approach that otherwise could have given them something that they would have wanted. Extrapolating from that, you can probably see how there would be a negative financial effect associated with that. When it's all said and done, really there's more that we could talk about here, including how the index affects risk-taking behaviors, entrepreneurship, education, politics. But truth be told, it's hard to say what part of uncertainty avoidance causes the most changes to the economy. And honestly, things get a lot more complicated when you start to consider how the other 5 equally, if not more complex dimensions play into things. Either way, hopefully you learned something new today about how culture can have an effect on the economy, whether it be through innovation, communication, compatibility, or otherwise. And yeah, that pretty much does it for my uncertainty avoidance presentation.